Hey everybody, Dave here with another Pathfinder rule reminder for you, and today's question is about players riding upon other players. With the release of Howl of the Wild, we now have large size ancestries that players can play. So this specific scenario involves, what if we have two players and one of them is a human that's medium size and the other is a minotaur, which is large size? What are the rules for the human player to ride upon their large sized minotaur friend into combat? And so let's take a look at these rules. The rules are provided in Howl of the Wild, the same book that gives us the new large size ancestries, and it's on page 9. And the first thing that this rule says is a PC can ride on another PC as long as the second PC is at least two size categories larger than them. So this is a little different than the rules we've seen before. And before Howl of the Wild, when you looked at any information, for example, the mount action, it would specifically say that you used it to get upon a creature that was one size category larger than you. So that right there is going to invalidate the scenario of a medium-sized human riding on a large-sized minotaur, because that's only a one size category difference. Instead, what we would have to have is a small size character wanting to ride upon the minotaur. So that would be a halfling, for example, or a goblin, anything that's small size, leshy, whatever, riding upon the minotaur. I actually think the new moon heritage Serengei are like small size minotaurs. So you could even have some bizarre situation of a small size minotaur riding upon a large size minotaur shoulder. Players don't get up to wacky stuff with these rules, and that's one possibility. But anyway, I think the reason that the previous rules always referred to two size categories larger is because they were specifically talking about creatures that were intended to be mounts. These are typically long creatures instead of tall creatures, and typically quadrupeds. So even though the rules didn't, specify that you had to be long instead of tall, and you had to have four limbs in walking upon instead of two, that was what the assumption was. So we're talking horses or riding dogs, wargs for goblins, stuff like that. But now that is actually PCs who are typically going to be bipedal, we have a new set of rules. So that's the first part. You have to be two size categories larger for that to serve as a creature to be ridden upon. Here it also says, this requires a tremendous amount of coordination to ensure the smaller PC doesn't get in the way, or the two PCs don't jostle each other into losing actions. As a result, for most parties, this tactic is less favorable than the smaller PC just using their own mount. And yeah, and as I go through this, I think it's going to become more and more clear that there's not a lot of mechanical benefit to having one PC ride upon another, especially in combat. So why would they do this? Answer simple: because it's fun, because it's cool, because it's narratively interesting. Those are the reasons why players are going to want to engage in these rules, not because in most cases, there might be one little fringe area we'll talk about in a bit, but certainly in most cases, there's not going to be a distinct mechanical benefit to doing this. I think right off the bat, the most clear downside to this is you're now occupying the same space on the board, which means if someone wants to hit you with an AoE, they only have to hit one of your squares instead of being able to set the cone or the burst or whatever, so it's hitting two different squares. So that right off the bat is a downside to doing this. But let's go ahead and see what else it says here. If a PC who is at least two sizes smaller rides along with another PC or similar non-minion intelligent creature, roll both their initiatives and use the lower of the two results. The two PCs act in either order on the same initiative count. So what the raw is saying here is it doesn't matter what order you roll your initiatives between the person riding and the characters being ridden upon. They both roll their initiatives as normal, but you take the lower of the two, and every round those two characters can take their actions in either order, but my reading of the rule would be that whichever one goes first, they resolve all of their actions. They resolve their entire turn, and then the other character resolves all of their actions in their turn separately, not intermingling those actions together. And it continues on to say, while traveling in this way, the PCs gain 2 actions at the start of their turns instead of 3, since the larger PC spends 1 action keeping the smaller one balanced on their back, and the smaller PC spends 1 action maintaining their grip. There's not a whole lot of benefit to do this mechanically. The benefit in doing this is going to be narrative, because it's fun, because it's cool, because it might be awesome to be a halfling perched on your buddy's shoulder, your minotaur buddy's shoulder, and you're holding a horn with one hand and you're whacking people with a mace as he runs past them with the other. Mechanically, not going to give you a lot of benefit, but it's that narrative moment that you might appreciate. And the last bit of text says, some ancestries specialize in being able to carry smaller riders or have feats to enable this, such as centaurs. So that's the guidance we have in Raw for riding PCs. You must have 2 size categories different, and both those people are going to be reduced to only having 2 actions per turn. Basically, they're each losing 1 action in favor of either not accidentally throwing a person off or holding on for dear life and staying on that minotaur shoulder or what have you. And initiative is going to be at the lowest of their 2 rolls, but every round, as I read it, they can swap. So, like, maybe one round is most advantageous for the writer to go first, and then the character being ridden to go next, or in the next round, they can swap that order and go the other way. So let's talk about those special situations like the centaur. So centaurs, if we look at their ancestry, they have a special feature called Mount. And it says your equine body is well suited for carrying trusted allies. A PC can ride you if they are 1 size category smaller than you, rather than needing to be 2 size categories smaller. So if the PC that is being ridden upon is like a centaur and has the Mount feature as part of their ancestry, then you only have to be 1 size category different. So a medium-sized human could ride a centaur that is large size, whereas they could not if it was a minotaur. In that case, the minotaur would just be carrying the medium-sized creature like anything else. And there's an additional optional feat that the centaur players can pick up at level 5, and it's called Accommodating Mount. You've trained to serve as a mount, if only for your most trusted allies. When another PC rides you as a mount, your expert coordination allows them to gain 3 actions at the start of their turn, rather than the 2 they would normally for riding another PC. You still gain only 2 actions at the start of your turn instead of 3, as you spend 1 action keeping them balanced on your back and ensuring they're firmly mounted. So if you do want to lighten the load a little bit of the rule that says you only are going to start each turn with 2 actions instead of the normal 3, then the centaur player could get accommodating Mount to offset that a little bit by giving the person riding upon them their full 3 actions. So there are a number of other things that we might want to look at, questions that come up in regard to this. And I will say there's going to have to be a little bit of GM interpretation for a lot of this. GMs are going to have to think about the rules as written and the rules as intended or interpreted, and what's going to be most narratively satisfying and most importantly fun for your players as you figure out how to use each of these rules. But the first is going to be the question about bulk. So if one player is riding upon another player, do we need to enforce bulk rules? I would assume so. And so if you want to know what the bulk of a character is, that's going to be found in Player Core 1. There's a table on page 269 that gives you sort of a rough average bulk for a creature by size category. and then you would just take the additional bulk that that character is carrying, add those two numbers together, and that would be the bulk of what the creature being ridden upon is now having to accommodate. Another question would be about mounted feats. So especially if maybe like you're a cavalier, you might have a lot of feats that they give you special abilities and features while you are mounted. So how does this apply to writing another PC? The section on writing PC doesn't really go into this. So again, this is going to be a place where each GM's going to have to make their own rulings. I think a lot of the mounted feats are definitely or probably going to apply when you are riding upon a creature that has the mount feature, like a centaur, and may not apply to when you're riding another creature or another PC. You'll notice the section on riding PC doesn't use the term mount anywhere. It doesn't say that you use the mount action to get onto or off of the creature that you're riding upon. It doesn't refer to the creature you're riding upon as a quote mount. So a lot of the feats that give you bonuses to being mounted, I think GMs are well within their right to say, like, I don't think it's going to fit the situation where you're riding perched on the shoulder of a minotaur versus on the back of a centaur. But again, do what's going to be narratively satisfying and fun for your players, as long as it doesn't break the game. Another thing to keep in mind is a lot of these mount feats, or not a lot, but some of them certainly imply that the person who is riding is also controlling the creature they're riding upon, and that's not going to be the case when you're riding upon another PC. That the PC that's being ridden upon is going to maintain their full agency and do what they want to move where they want to go. So those feats for mounted combat may not apply here either. So what about things like in mounted combat, it talks about cover? Well, this is an area that I think probably would apply to when you're riding upon a PC, even though they don't have the mount trait and may not officially be called a mount, just because it makes sense to me. Those cover rules are that the rider receives basically receives lesser cover from the creature they're riding upon. That's going to be a +1 to AC, but it also says that they are going to suffer a -2 to their reflex saves, simply because they're not in control entirely of being able to dodge out of the way of things, at the mercy of what they're riding upon. Kind of akin to that, especially with reflex saves and area of effect attacks, do you as a rider occupy all the same spaces as the creature you're riding upon? The section on riding PCs doesn't go into this, but the section on mounted combat does specifically say that if you're mounted on a creature that's larger than you, then your tree is occupying all the same squares as they are. I would assume this is the same for when you are riding a PC. Instead of having to choose which of the 4 specific squares a large creature occupies for your square, you would be treated as occupying all 4 of those squares at the same time. Another quick question is about reach. In mounted combat, it says you got to have 15 feet of reach to attack 2 squares away instead of 10 feet of reach to attack 2 squares away if you're riding upon a mount that is size large. Wouldn't apply if you're like a small sized character riding on a medium sized riding dog or warg or something like that. I would assume that's going to apply here. So even though that this is, again, I'm not entirely certain if, where we draw the line between riding a PC and them being a mount, other than centaurs having the mount trait. I think rules like this will still apply. How about using a jousting weapon? Jousting weapons are used on mounts, and what it is you can either use the jousting weapon, for example, a lance, with 2 hands and do its regular damage. In the case of a lance, that would be a D8 weapon die. Or you can joust with it, which means you can hold it in one hand and have your other hand free to hold a shield. Um, and it does, in the case of a lance, it does a d6 damage wielded in one hand instead of 1d8 for two hands. I would assume that you would have to do that when you're riding on another creature, using the example again of a halfling on a minotaur. They can't wield a two-handed weapon. They'd have to have one hand on minotaur's horns or whatever to hold themselves steady, and then they would joust with the other. Now, the tricky area here is jousting weapons say that if you move at least 10 feet on the action immediately before you make a strike with your lance, then you're going to get a bonus to damage equal to the number of weapon dice. So in using a regular lance, that'd be 1d6 damage jousting. You would get a +1 net damage if the mount that you're riding upon moves at least 10 feet on the action immediately before you make that strike. So that's the piece that by raw gets really fuzzy here, because the rules for jousting and for mounts assume that you, as the rider, you're controlling the mount. And so on your turn, you're controlling where the mount goes and how that action economy is spent. But with the rules for riding a PC, one creature completely takes all their actions and completely resolves their turn, and then the next creature does, or the next player does. So that makes it a little more difficult to say that if the creature being ridden upon takes their actions first, does this mean that they have to spend their last action on stride, and the first action of the next character's turn must be a strike in order to get that bonus? In my Ask a Dev series, I talked to, or Ask a Pathfinder designer series, a question similar to this came up, and they said that whenever you see this text that says on the action before, they're referring to your actions, and you're not splitting between rounds, you're not splitting between players. Is intended to, like, you spend your first action to do a thing, and then your second. So that kind of by raw makes the jousting trait just not really functional. So as with my other recommendations, I say, do what makes sense and what makes fun. And I would say, as long as during the turn of the person being ridden, during that turn, if they move 10 feet at least, then I would allow the character riding to make that strike and get the bonus. I've actually not had this situation come up in my own games yet, but I think I would probably give them the freedom to intermingle their three actions and use them however makes sense. That can get fuzzy when you're getting to things like if they're suffering persistent damage, when does that persistent damage kick in, stuff like that. But that just seems to make more sense to me and be easier for the players to understand if you say, okay, player one that's playing the Centaur, you spend your first action stride. Okay, now go ahead, human on its back, spend your first action to make your strike. It just makes it easier in my rules. So I would allow that, and also the question: would you allow jousting to be something that a character riding upon another player that is not a mount like a centaur? Would you allow that? For me, this is falling in that category of this sounds fun, so why not? If a halfling wants to have a lance in one hand and holding the minotaur's horn in the other, and the minotaur is going to make a charge attack against an enemy, why not let the halfling, thrust with their lance and get their jousting benefit in doing so? Lowering or just getting a +1 bonus to that damage, making it 1d6 +1 instead of 1d6 damage. It's not going to break the game, and it sounds fun, so let your players do stuff like that. Okay, so that's it for today's rule reminder about what are the rules for when a smaller size player wants to ride upon a larger size ally. in combat. If you have any questions about this, please leave them in the comments below. If you have suggestions for future rule reminders, also leave those in the comments below. And as always, I want to take a quick moment to say thank you to everybody out there who supports me, whether that be by clicking the like button, leaving your comments, subscribing to the channel, subscribing to the Patreon, buying a super thanks. All of that adds up, and I really appreciate all the support you folks give me. And with that, thanks for watching, take care, and happy gaming.